I have received a letter. Order. I've received a letter from Andrew Little seeking to debate under Standing Order 389 the release of the report on the government inquiry into foreign trust disclosure rules. The release of the report is a particular case of recent occurrence for which there is ministerial responsibility. The subject of the report is a significant one, and the government has stated it will implement most of its recommendations. It is not clear, however, from the government's response which recommendations it will implement and whether it will involve changes to legislation. Therefore, this may be the only occasion for the House to debate this issue. The matter has attracted significant media and public attention in the past few months, raising potential risks to preserving New Zealand's reputation. Having carefully considered this application, I believe it does require the urgent attention of the House. I therefore call on Andrew Little to move that the House take note of an urgent matter of public importance. Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, John Key and the National Government have had to be dragged kicking and screaming to do anything about the dodgy foreign trusts regime that they have set up and to ensure that at last New Zealand gets to preserve, or at least try and restore, its international reputation in tax matters. This is not a question or a matter of recent occurrence. It's been going for some time. The government was told in 2013 that there were problems that the Inland Revenue and Treasury saw with our foreign trusts regime. They did not like what they saw. And it's interesting to note that by 2013, we had 7,700 of these foreign trusts operating in New Zealand. They had more than doubled since 2008. More than doubled since this government took office. That was between 2008 and 2013. I have to say that since 2013, they have nearly doubled again. They are nearly up to 12,000. They have nearly doubled again. And this government has had repeated advice from Inland Revenue and from Treasury saying that our foreign trusts regime is not good. It's not adequate. The disclosure rules are hopeless. They do not know what is going on, and they cannot assure the government that the regime that is in place is not harbouring ill-gotten gains and dodgy people, which might be the company that the National Party keeps from time to time, but that's not the point. When you're in government, your duty, your foremost duty, is to preserve the interests of New Zealand. That's what New Zealand government ministers are meant to do. Put the New Zealand people and their government and their sovereign interests first. That was what was demanded of them. But they got these reports starting in 2013, and they did not want to act on them. Finally, Inland Revenue decided they would make it part of their work program. And they told the minister, we are making this part of the work program. And the minister obviously let it go because the minister then received a couple of updates saying that this was on the work program and that work was underway, reviewing and having a look at our foreign trust regime because of the concern that good, honest, hard-working public servants in Inland Revenue, and Treasury for that matter, had about the regime. They didn't like it. And then what happened? Mysteriously, the Inland Revenue review was stopped in its tracks. Oh, it stopped in its tracks. No notice, just a report from a Deputy Commissioner saying, for whatever reason, we no longer are devoting resources to this review. Something had happened. And we now know what happened, thanks to the Panama Papers. Oh, the Panama Papers. They have shone a light on our tax system and the administration of it. They have shone a light on what ministers in the national government knew but did not want anybody else to know. And they shone a light, and those papers have shown that New Zealand has been operating a dodgy foreign trust regime. How did the Inland Revenue review come to a grinding halt? We now know that the chap described as the Prime Minister's close personal advisor because he doesn't have a practicing certificate anymore, although he was qualified in the law, his close personal advisor, his sometime investment manager of some of the Prime Minister's personal funds, he wrote a letter representing a thing called the foreign trust industry. Who knew we had that? It hasn't appeared in any NZTE report about economic development or any NB report about the way to bounteous growth in the future. But anyway, we do have this thing called the foreign trust industry, and they wrote to the Minister of Revenue and the Minister of Finance, and they said, you shouldn't really touch this, or words to that effect. It's not a direct quote. They stopped it. And the then Minister of Revenue, having received this letter, within days, stopped the review. It was that quick. Has there ever been a lobbying effort that has had an effect that efficiently? Ordinary people in the Coral Lounge, talk to the Prime Minister about it too. Ordinary Kiwis, middle New Zealand, because of course they want a foreign trust regime where there's no disclosure and people can hide their ill-gotten gains and they can rip off the countries they come from. Of course we all want that. It is just rubbish. It is just rubbish. And Chris Bishop, the sometime representative of the tobacco industry, sits in his corner up there, looking like he's been quaffing on nicotine for centuries. He isn't disturbed. He isn't disturbed about it. He doesn't care about it. He doesn't care about it. He's waiting. He's waiting to launch the assault on plain packaging. That's what he's here for, to make sure that plain packaging doesn't proceed. But in the meantime, the rest of New Zealand is concerned about the reputation that our country is gaining abroad for being the host for dodgy tax regimes. It's not who we are. It's not who we are as a country. We are better people than that. New Zealanders, to a person, hard-working, honest, and expect the same of us. But not this government, not the wide boys in the national government, not those people who rub shoulders with the rich and the powerful from overseas and grant any favour going, because that is the grace and favour government. They don't care about that. It was John Key's dream to have a financial services industry with zero rating tax instruments and all that sort of stuff. That was his dream. He said it was going to add billions to the New Zealand economy. And what has the foreign trust regime added to the New Zealand economy? $27 million.
Who gets that?
$27 million. And that is the billings of the lawyers and the accountants who set these things up. They're the ones with the websites that sell the stuff and say New Zealand is a tax haven. But the Prime Minister doesn't accept it's a tax haven. Even the independent reviewer struggled to shuck off the label tax haven. He said, oh, according to the OEC definition, we're not a tax haven. But then he very quickly had to say, but anyway, it's an outdated term and let's not look at it too closely, because actually the fair is we might actually be one. We might be one. When everybody else describes us as one, then we probably are one. It's the old duck test. If it waddles and quacks and has feathers, then it probably is one of those that waddles, quacks and has feathers. That's the duck test, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has been embarrassed and caught short by the Panama Papers, by whoever, whatever public-spirited person hacked into Mossack Fonseca's computer system and found this treasure trove of information that showed the world just who we are. That showed the world just who we are. And it was just another. The information revealed showed just how this government operates, just how much it cares or actually doesn't care about those things that actually are important to our identity as a nation and our reputation abroad. We only knew about this and our government's failure because of international reportage, particularly through the Australian Financial Review. And there is one respect in which, with the John Shewan report, that I don't agree, when he tried to analyse whether or not our reputation had been damaged. And he had sort of done a Google search or gone onto international media and said there wasn't much coverage of it. But that's not the reputation we're talking about. Because the rest of the world, 6 billion other people, or however many it is, don't spend their time talking about tax regimes of the world. I'm not sure many people in the Brexit vote last week were thinking about tax regimes of the world. But there is a cohort of people in different parts of the world, accountants, lawyers, those dealing with the huge wealth of very rich people. They do think about tax systems, and they do look at what happens in other parts of the world. And it's our reputation amongst them that counts, and amongst international bankers, and amongst international organisations, public service organisations, whose job is to keep track of what is happening with tax regimes and the flow of finance and money around the world. That's where the reputation counts. That's where our reputation has to be above board. That's where it counts most. And with all due respect to Mr. Shewan, he got that wrong. Our reputation has suffered. We have been the subject of headlines around the world and of international reportage in newspapers, and we are the subject of comments in websites around the world, including websites hosted here that describe us as a tax haven. So let's not be cute about it. Our reputation has suffered. But to his credit, John Shewan has had a look using his formidable technical tax brain and said the disclosure requirements are inadequate. But of course that is directly contrary to what the Prime Minister spent weeks telling New Zealanders. There's nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. We have full disclosure, he said. We have full disclosure. But John Shewan didn't say that, he said the opposite. The disclosure requirements are inadequate, and has now recommended a set of significant disclosure requirements that should be met. And the government says we're not quite sure which recommendations we're going to take up. It is a pity that Mr. Shewan didn't go further and say not only should Inland Revenue be collecting this significant additional data, but that it should be publicly available. As so many business records in New Zealand, for those who do business in New Zealand and domiciled in New Zealand, already face, there should be public access to the details and the information applying to foreign trusts. It's not unreasonable. Why would we grant ever more privilege to the rich and the powerful of the world because they want to set up a trust here, usually to use it to avoid tax obligations in the home country? Why would we? Why would we keep it secret to our agencies here when there will be good, innocent tax authorities in other parts of the world who will want to know what information our Inland Revenue holds about foreign trust settlors and those who are connected with them? Why shouldn't they know? Why should they have to know the precise information before they can ask it and get it from our Inland Revenue? That's not right. And it's not Kiwi rules, and it's not Kiwi standards. It might be Bill English standards, it might be John Key standards, but I think New Zealanders has already arrived at the conclusion that those are not standards that we ought to live by. That actually we represent something better. We represent something more wholesome. And it is about openness and transparency and honesty and doing business the right way and doing good business the right way. That's what New Zealanders demand. That's what this government, in spite of its repeated opportunities to do so, has singularly failed to uphold. Good, honest business principles. But instead, they've shacked up with the world's rich and powerful. They are looking after those at the top because they've long given up on middle New Zealand and everybody else. They just don't care. Perhaps they never did, but they don't care now. And they've been caught short, and we've been caught embarrassed, and it's not right. Good on John Shewan for coming up with the recommendations that he did. But actually, if this government wants to meet New Zealand's expectations and do the right thing for all New Zealand, do the Kiwi thing, then they'll go beyond John Shewan's recommendations. They'll follow the advice of various other independent experts who have said that there is more that is needed. Why don't they follow the advice of Deborah Russell, well-known tax expert at Massey University, and go beyond the recommendations of John Shewan? Why don't they do that? That'll be the test for this government. Are they a good, wholesome, honest government that believes in good, wholesome, honest business? Or are they just rubbing shoulders with those they prefer to favour, the privileged and the powerful and the elite, at the expense of everybody else? Because so far that's the track record they've set for themselves. And Mr. Speaker, it's not good enough. We can do better, but when it comes to ministerial decisions, that responsibility is reposed on that side of the House. And those people, and people like Bill English, and people like the floundering Minister of Revenue, who we only expect a straight answer from. They're the people we repose the responsibility of maintaining New Zealand's reputation. So far they've failed. They have a chance to get it right and to serve New Zealand better and to serve New Zealand well. Let's see whether they take it, Mr. Speaker. Let's see whether they take it. New Zealand expects nothing less.
The Honourable, a point of order, the Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry to interrupt the Minister. During the contribution by Andrew Little, David Bennett interjected an unparliamentary comment. I could tell from your body language that you didn't hear it, but I certainly did. And I ask you now to call on him to withdraw and apologise.
Well, I think unfortunately for the member raising the point of order, it is a requirement for points of order of that type to be taken immediately, and therefore I am not going to require Mr Bennett to withdraw and apologise. He may want to anyway. The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Mr. Speaker, there is